You need to watch this if you crave chills down your spine. Welcome to Soul Studios. Here, true crime meets the unknown. Suspense lurks in every shadow, and supernatural forces whisper from the dark. We craft chilling, edge-of-your-seat short stories inspired by the eerie, the unexplained, and the most haunting mysteries. 3 new stories drop every week, each one darker than the last. Are you ready to step inside? Subscribe now before the next story finds you.
In 1999, an NYPD detective stumbled into one of the most haunting murder scenes in city history. A family slaughtered around a dinner table, their eyes sewn open, a 4th chair mysteriously pulled out, and a tape recorder playing Footsteps. The case went cold, but it never let go. 25 years later, the same nightmare returns and pulls him back in. As he investigates the chilling copycat crime, old traumas resurface, hallucinations blur reality, and the detective begins to question whether he's chasing a killer or being chased by something far worse. This is a psychological horror thriller based on a fictional but disturbingly real-feeling case you'll never forget. If you crave slow-burn horror, disturbing true crime-style mysteries, and stories that haunt long after they end, subscribe to Soul Studios now, because the next story we tell might be the one that finds you. I wake up every night at 3:17 a.m. on the dot. It's always the same sequence. I'm ripped from sleep by the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps coming down the hallway outside my bedroom. In that disorienting moment between dream and reality, I fully expect to see someone emerge from the darkness. But no one ever does. Every night, just those footsteps, one after another getting closer, and my pounding heart. For 20 years, I was a homicide detective with the NYPD. I saw humanity at its absolute worst. I've witnessed crime scenes that would rob most people of sleep forever. But nothing I encountered in those 2 decades comes close to the case that ended my career. That case is why I wake up at 3:17 a.m. to phantom footsteps. It's why I'm sitting here now, a retired detective with trembling hands, trying to make sense of a nightmare that began on a rainy night in 1999. It started with a phone call on November 2nd, 1999. I can remember every detail of that night. The sergeant's voice on the line was equal parts urgent and disturbed. "Frank, I got something. You better get down here. It's bad." I was bone-tired after a long shift, but something in his tone cut through my fatigue. Within minutes, I was driving through the deserted streets of Queens, rain pounding on my windshield, siren off. I had no idea that I was heading toward a scene that would etch itself into my psyche forever. I arrived at a stately brownstone on a quiet Queens street. Police lights painted the wet brick walls in flashes of red and blue. Uniformed officers milled around, their faces pale. One young cop was off to the side, losing his dinner in the bushes. I braced myself and stepped through the open front door, immediately hit by the heavy coppery smell of blood mingled with something else, something pungent and chemical that I couldn't place at first. The entryway led directly into a dining room, and that's where I saw them. 3 people were seated around a long wooden dinner table, as if they'd just sat down for a meal. A man was at the head of the table, slumped backward in his chair. To his right was a woman in a nightgown, her head lolled to the side. At the far end was a small child, maybe 7 or 8 years old, propped up high on a booster seat. All 3 of them were dead. There was so much blood. Deep red arterial spray had drenched the white tablecloth and pooled onto the hardwood floor. Each victim's throat had been slashed open ear to ear, a gruesome smile of gaping wound on every neck. I forced myself to breathe through my mouth as I moved closer. That chemical smell grew stronger. It was coming from the victims. Then I realized what it was. Formalin. Thick black thread glistened wetly across their faces. The killer had sewn their eyes open. The thread was coated in formalin or some kind of preservative, giving off that sharp medicinal odor. Those eyes, glassy, lifeless, yet forced unnaturally wide, stared right through me. I felt a surge of nausea and gripped the back of an empty chair to steady myself. That's when it struck me. There were 4 chairs at the table. 3 were occupied by corpses, and the 4th was pulled out slightly, as if someone had been sitting there or had left in a hurry. I glanced around the room, my heart thudding. Was the killer bold enough to sit down and dine with his victims post-mortem, or was someone missing? My partner, Detective Luis Navarro, stepped up beside me, muttering a shaky greeting. "What the hell happened here, Frank?" he whispered, his eyes fixed on the horrific tableau. I didn't have an answer. Instead, I pointed numbly at the empty fourth chair. Navarro frowned. "Wait, wasn't this a family of 4? The neighbors said there was a couple with 2 kids living here." A jolt of adrenaline cut through my shock. He was right. If the intel was accurate, a second child was unaccounted for. I scanned the room for any sign of a 4th victim. "Check the rest of the house," I barked at the uniforms. As they hurried off, something else caught my attention. A faint sound, almost drowned out by the hum of police radios and thunder rumbling outside. It was a recording. A small cassette tape recorder sat on a sideboard near the hallway, its wheels turning. I raised a hand to hush the room. In the sudden silence, we all heard it. The unmistakable sound of footsteps echoing down a hallway. The cadence was slow and measured, like someone walking on creaky floorboards, coming closer. I exchanged a puzzled glance with Navarro and then checked my watch instinctively. It was just past 4 a.m. The tape continued, the footsteps growing louder, then abruptly stopping. A click indicated the end of playback. Someone had left this recorder here, playing on a loop. Navarro swallowed hard. "Footsteps? What is that? Some kind of sick joke?" I didn't respond immediately. My mind was already racing, trying to decipher this bizarre clue. Why footsteps? Why that particular sound? And why place it here to greet us? As the other officers finished searching the house, they confirmed our fears. The 4th family member, a 10-year-old boy named Michael, was nowhere to be found. No body, no sign of him at all. The only thing out of place was an overturned chair in his bedroom and muddy footprints leading from his window to the backyard. In the mud we could see small shoe prints alongside larger ones. They vanished at the street, washed away by the storm. Standing in that house with the lights flickering from the storm, I felt an icy dread wash over me. The entire scene was the stuff of nightmares. We had a missing child, 3 corpses posed at a table, and that tape recorder playing phantom footsteps. Everything seemed to point to 3:17 a.m., the time the murders happened. I found myself staring at the kitchen clock on the wall. Its glass was cracked, and its hands had stopped dead at 3:17. Rainwater from the leaky ceiling dripped onto the woman's limp, soaked nightgown, matting her hair to her cheeks. There was a pale, lifeless quality to her skin that made her look like a ghost already. In that moment, I didn't just see a crime scene. I felt something profoundly wrong lingering in the air, like an evil presence still watching us. I had to pull myself together. "Get to work, Frank." We had a job to do. We collected every piece of evidence we could find, the tape recorder and cassette, the bloody knife we discovered in the kitchen sink, the black thread fibers. Forensics snapped photos of the family as we found them, their ghastly open-eyed stares forever captured on film. Through it all I kept glancing back at that 4th chair and listening, in my mind, to those recorded footsteps. I could still hear them, echoing faintly in my head. As dawn broke grey and cold, I stepped outside that brownstone feeling like I had left a part of myself in that dining room. I didn't know it yet, but a part of my sanity remained in that house, seated at that blood-soaked table with those 3 souls, waiting for the missing boy and the killer who took him. The investigation that followed was exhaustive and frustrating. For weeks, our homicide unit poured every resource into finding the missing boy and identifying the monster who had slaughtered his family. We chased down dozens of leads. We interviewed neighbors, friends, distant relatives. We dug into the family's history. Nothing unusual there. They were ordinary people, which somehow made it all worse. Crime scene techs analyzed the black thread. It was a heavy-duty upholstery thread, common and untraceable, and the knife, no prints, wiped clean. The tape from the recorder was examined over and over. Aside from the eerie sound of approaching footsteps, it held no hidden messages, no clues, just a 30-second loop recorded at 3:17 a.m. and then silence. It was as if the killer wanted us to know the time, to hear him coming, but not much else. Every night, after long days of dead ends, I found myself lying awake at 3:17 a.m., my mind replaying those phantom footsteps. At first, I thought it was just my memory tormenting me. But then one night, about a week after the murders, I awoke to the distinct sound of floorboards creaking in my own hallway. It was that same pattern of steps from the tape. Slow, deliberate. I shot out of bed, gun drawn, and burst into the hall. The hardwood was empty, the apartment still. Only my ticking clock answered me, reading 3:17. I didn't sleep at all after that. As the weeks turned to months, the case refused to break. The media called it the Queen's Horror and plastered lurid headlines everywhere. NYPD had nothing to give them. No suspects, no ransom demand, no trace of young Michael. It was like the killer and the boy had vanished into thin air after that night. I could feel the case gnawing at me, eating away my sense of reality. I began to dread nightfall, because I knew those footsteps would come walking through my silence in the early hours. I started hearing them outside of my dreams too. One afternoon, while reviewing case files at my desk in the precinct, I swore I heard a faint footfall down the empty corridor, just around 3:17 p.m., in broad daylight, no less. I sprinted out, heart hammering, only to find nobody there. My colleagues noticed my jumpiness. Navarro tried to cover for me, but I could see the worry in his eyes. I was sleeping maybe 2 hours a night, living off coffee and the burning drive to solve this case. A few months in, I began seeing her. At first, it was just out of the corner of my eye, a pale figure in a white gown, there 1 second and gone the next. The first time was in the reflection of a window late one night at HQ, a woman standing behind me, dripping water onto the floor. Startled, I spun around, hand on my weapon, but there was no one there, only a puddle of water that led down the hallway and faded away. I remember shivering uncontrollably as I mopped up the water with a rag, telling myself I must have spilled my drink or that the roof was leaking again. But deep down I recognized the figure I'd seen. It looked like the mother from the brownstone, the woman with the sewn open eyes. Except now she was alive, or rather undead, and staring right at me through the glass. Night after night, the apparition grew bolder. I'd wake up to the sense that someone was in my bedroom. More than once I caught a glimpse of a pale woman in a soaked nightgown standing just outside my bedroom door or at the foot of my bed. Every time I'd jolt fully awake and she would be gone, leaving only a patch of damp carpet or the faint scent of rainwater. And always I heard her whisper my name, Frank, drawn out in a raspy, mournful voice that made my skin crawl. I didn't tell anyone about the ghost. How could I? I was a decorated detective, not some rookie spooked by shadows. Admitting that I was seeing a dead victim in my apartment felt like signing my own psychiatric discharge papers. So I kept it inside and instead poured my energy back into the case. I returned to the brownstone countless times, looking for anything we missed. That house was never rented out again. It sat there dark and empty, as if the whole neighborhood knew it was tainted. I would stand on its threshold at 3:17 a.m., listening to the silence, half hoping to hear those same footsteps or to see her, the ghostly mother, beckoning from inside. Sometimes I thought I heard a faint echo of footsteps upstairs or a child's sob, but when I investigated, there was nothing but dust and my own ragged breath. The stress took a toll on me. My wife, Margaret, tried to be supportive at first, but as I became more obsessed and erratic, our marriage frayed. She woke more than once to find me not in bed, but pacing the living room at 3 a.m., or listening to the cassette tape of the footsteps on repeat in the dark. One night, Margaret finally lost her patience. She grabbed the tape recorder and yelled, "Frank, this is destroying you! He's gone! That boy's gone!" I can't just let it go, I roared back, ripping it from her hands. Don't you understand? I hear them. Every night I hear them. My voice cracked, and I realized I was on the verge of sobbing. Margaret's expression shifted from anger to fear, and then to a kind of pitying sadness. She didn't understand. How could she? Not long after that, she packed a suitcase and went to stay with her sister. I watched her leave, feeling hollow. The job had taken everything from me except this damn case. Eventually, the case file was officially marked cold. Other horrific crimes came and went in New York, and even I was pulled into new investigations, but I was never really present for them. Part of me was trapped in that brownstone dining room, replaying that night on an endless loop. I kept Michael's school photo pinned to my desk, the missing boy's gap-toothed smile peering out at me. He became my silent motivation. I would find out what happened to him, no matter what it did to me. After 2 decades on the force, I had become a shell of the man who first walked into that brownstone. In 2015, with my health declining and no closer to the truth, I took an early retirement. I hoped that stepping away from the job might quiet the nightmares, but retirement only gave me more hours alone with my demons. The footsteps at 3:17 a.m. continued unabated. The pale woman in the soaked nightgown still crept into my peripheral vision, sometimes standing outside my window in the rain, sometimes in the reflection of my bathroom mirror. I lived in a constant state of hypervigilance and dread, jumping at noises, sleeping with the lights on like a scared kid. I started to wonder if I was losing my mind. Maybe the horror of that crime had finally broken me. I even went so far as to see a psychiatrist who diagnosed me with PTSD. He gave me medication that dulled the edges of my anxiety, but did nothing to stop the hallucinations, if that's what they were. By 2025, 26 years after the Brownstone murders, I was living alone in a tiny apartment in Queens, estranged from my wife, with no close friends left. My days were quiet and empty, but my nights were filled with the sound of those slow, creeping footsteps and the haunting whisper of my name from a dead woman's lips. I came to accept that this was just my life now, a never-ending haunting. I would never find closure, and I would never know the truth. Or so I thought. Because one morning in early 2025 I received a phone call. A call that ripped open all those carefully sealed wounds and dragged me right back into the darkness. It was a chilly March morning in 2025 when my phone rang, jolting me from a light sleep on the couch. I fumbled for the phone, heart already climbing into my throat. I wasn't used to getting calls, especially not early in the day. "Hello?" My voice came out rough and wary. "Is this Detective Frank Halloran?" a young male voice asked. He sounded hesitant, like he wasn't sure if he had the right number. Technically, I wasn't detective anymore, but I replied, "This is Frank. Who's calling?" "Sir, my name is Detective Ryan Keller, 112th Precinct. I hope it's okay that I'm reaching out. I got your number from a retired NYPD contact." The name didn't ring a bell, but I stayed silent, waiting. I could hear the nervous energy in his voice. Keller continued, "I'm calling about an old case of yours. The Queens triple homicide from November 1999, the Brownstone cold case." He paused. The mere mention of it made my mouth go dry. After all these years, someone was calling about that night. I sat up straight, gripping the phone tighter. "Go on," I managed. We have a situation, sir." Keller's voice wavered slightly, as if he couldn't believe what he was about to say. "Late last night, we got a call about a disturbance at a house in Richmond Hill, Queens. When we arrived..." He took a breath. "We found 3 victims, a family, seated at their dining room table. Their throats were cut, and their eyes were sewn open." I closed my eyes, my free hand clenched into a fist. A sickening mix of dread and vindication flooded me. Keller kept talking, his words tumbling out in a rush now. There was a 4th chair at the table, empty and pulled out. And in the next room we found a cassette recorder. It was playing the sound of footsteps. The time, 3:17 a.m., was written on the tape label. For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. It felt as if the world had tilted and I was sliding back into the nightmare I'd never truly left. I realized Detective Keller was still speaking, asking me something. I shook my head to clear it. "I'm sorry. What did you say?" "I asked if you would be willing to come consult on this case," he repeated gently. "I know you're retired, sir, but you know this case better than anyone, and honestly, I could use your insight. It's pretty bad." I almost let out a bitter laugh at that understatement. Pretty bad? The poor kid had just walked into the second coming of my worst nightmare. Of course it was bad. My mind was already racing. Another family butchered in the exact same way, after 26 years. Did this mean the killer was back? Had he been dormant all this time? Or was it a copycat who somehow knew the gruesome details of the original case? "Sir?" Keller prompted when I'd been quiet for too long. "I'll be there," I heard myself say. The words came out cold and determined, surprising me. In truth, part of me was terrified to dive back in, but another part, the part that had been tormented and waiting for answers all these years, felt a grim resolve. This was my chance, maybe my last chance, to put an end to it. "Thank you," the young detective said, audible relief in his tone. We arranged to meet that afternoon at the 112th precinct to review the case. When I hung up, I realized my hands were trembling. The footsteps, the eyes, the fourth chair, it was all happening again. I glanced around my dim apartment. In the reflection of the blank TV screen, I almost expected to see the pale woman standing behind me, nodding in approval that I was finally getting back on the hunt. But there was only my haggard reflection and the empty room. For the first time in years, the silence at 3:17 a.m. The previous night had been broken not by phantom footsteps, but by a real phone call. And that call had dragged everything that lurked in my nightmares out into the harsh light of day. That evening, I met Detective Keller at the precinct, and together we drove to the new crime scene. The house in Richmond Hill was eerily similar in layout to the 1999 brownstone. As I stepped inside, the stench of dried blood hit me, and I had to pause, closing my eyes to master the swell of memories threatening to crash over me. In my mind, for a split second, I saw the original dining room, the father, mother, and child staring at me with dead eyes. I blinked, and the image was gone, replaced by the reality of another family's dining room splattered with blood. Keller walked me through the scene. The forensics team had finished their work, but the outline of where the bodies had been was still evident. 3 chalk outlines around a table set for 4, blood spatter on the walls and ceiling. It was all the same. I swallowed hard as I looked at the empty 4th chair that had been pulled out from the table. On the seat was a small evidence marker next to a portable cassette player bagged in plastic. Through the bag, I could see a strip of masking tape on the cassette with black marker, 3:17 a.m. I knelt down, examining the chair and the floor. "Whose house was this?" I asked quietly. Keller flipped open his notebook. "The Patel family. Father, mother, and 1 daughter, age 6. They're the victims. There's also a son, age 11, missing. Name's Raj Patel. Neighbors say he was a sweet, quiet kid. He's gone without a trace, just like Michael in 99. My jaw tightened. Another child gone. The pattern was exact, too exact. My eyes drifted to that cassette player. "May I?" I asked, nodding toward it. Keller handed me a pair of latex gloves from his pocket. I snapped them on and gently lifted the evidence bag. The recorder was an old model, a bit scuffed. A chill ran through me. It looked very much like the one from my case. I pressed the play button through the plastic. The tape had been wound back to the beginning, and the moment I pressed play, the static-laced sound of footsteps filled the room. Even knowing it was coming, I felt my heart skip. The sound was identical to the old recording. I would stake my life on it. I stopped the playback. "This was running when you arrived?" Keller nodded. "Officer who cleared the house said it was playing on a loop, just sitting on that chair." I exhaled slowly, trying to keep my hand from shaking. "Back in 99, we found a similar recorder playing footsteps in the hallway." Keller glanced at me. "I read that in the case file. We think the killer set this one up too. The time on the label matches the estimated time of death." I stared at the black marker scrawl of 3:17 a.m. on the tape. Something about it bothered me. "Did your people dust this for prints?" "Yes, but nothing usable. Same with the needle and thread we found in the kitchen trash can. Looks like he stitched their eyelids post-mortem again, used latex gloves maybe. We did find one thing, though." He motioned for me to follow him into the next room. On the living room coffee table there was a plastic evidence bag containing a photograph. I recognized it immediately. It was a printed crime scene photo from the 1999 brownstone murders. It showed the victims at the table, eyes grotesquely sewn open. I felt a jolt. I had never seen this photo outside of the case file. It certainly was never made public. Keller looked as disturbed as I was. "We found this in the mailbox this morning. No note, just the photo. It's like whoever did this wanted to make sure we knew it's the same person, or someone who knows everything about the original." I gently took the bag to examine the photo closer. It was one of the shots my old partner Navarro had taken from the doorway, capturing the whole dining room. My mind raced. How did the new killer get this? The original crime scene photos would have been locked in police archives, unless someone with access provided it. I thought of the possibilities. An ex-cop gone rogue? Someone from forensics back then? Navarro himself? My gut rejected that. Luis Navarro had been a solid detective and a friend, and he'd died of a heart attack in 2010. But the presence of this photo meant our killer had deep knowledge of the 1999 case, deeper than any layperson could glean from newspapers. A cold realization crept over me. What if this wasn't a copycat at all? What if it was the same killer finally resurfacing after all these years? He could have kept a copy of the photo as a trophy, or even stolen it from police records. If it was the same man, he would be older now, possibly in his 50s or 60s. Was it even feasible for him to physically overpower families still? The Patel parents were in their 40s, no known ties to the original victims. Why strike now after so long? Keller broke into my thoughts. "Sir, there's something else." He hesitated, then pointed to the photo. "That case, the missing boy, Michael, he was never found, right?" I nodded stiffly. "No trace. We never even found out if he was alive or dead." Keller took a breath, as if uneasy to continue. "I keep thinking about him. If he survived, he'd be around 36 years old now. Maybe." He trailed off. I looked at him sharply. "Maybe what?" He shifted on his feet. "I don't know. It's probably nothing. Just, could he be doing this? The boy, I mean, could Michael have somehow become this?" I was taken aback by the suggestion coming from Keller's mouth, a theory I had barely dared to consider myself. Turned into a killer? He was 10 years old, I said, but even as I said it, I imagined that terrified boy being dragged off into the night. What had become of him? Keller quickly added, "You're right, it's far-fetched. It's just been gnawing at me." He managed a weak smile. "This case, it gets under your skin." I gave him a long look. The young detective's face was drawn and pale. I recognized the sleepless eyes, the haunted expression. He had only been on this for a day, and it was already consuming him. "Tell me about it," I muttered. We left the house after a thorough walk-through. The sun had set by then, and the street was dark except for the glow of a street lamp. The scene tape fluttered in a cold breeze. I noticed Keller staring back at the house, lost in thought. As we drove back, I suggested something that had been on my mind. "Keller, we should revisit the original brownstone. Sometimes being at the old scene can spark something. I have a key. That place has been left untouched for years." The truth was, I kept a spare key that the landlord had given me back when I was investigating. I never really let go of the case enough to return it. He glanced at me, eyebrows raised. "You think it could help?" I kept my eyes on the road. That case defined this killer. If it is the same person, maybe there's something back there that connects forward. If it's a copycat, retracing might still reveal how they know so much. Keller nodded slowly. "I'm game if you are. When do you want to go?" A part of me wanted to say right now, but I also felt a strange apprehension. "How about later tonight? I'd like to see it at the same hour, 3:17 a.m., if you're up for some lost sleep." He gave a slight, tense chuckle. "After what I've seen, I doubt I'll be sleeping anyway." We agreed to meet outside the brownstone around 2:30 a.m. to give us time to set up. As I dropped Keller off, he turned to me and said, "Thank you, by the way, for coming out of retirement for this. I can't imagine what it's like revisiting something so terrible, but I really appreciate your help." I forced a thin smile. "We'll get him," I replied. "This time, we'll get him." On the drive home to grab a few things, I felt a swirl of emotions. Dread, anticipation, even a grim excitement that maybe this nightmare would finally end. I strapped my old service revolver to my belt. Technically, I wasn't on duty, but I wasn't taking any chances. I also dug out my battered case file from '99, stuffing the photo Keller gave me inside. On a hunch, I pulled Michael's school photo from where I'd kept it all these years and slipped it into my jacket pocket. The boy's innocent face was a reminder of why I had to see this through. At 2:30 a.m., the old brownstone loomed ahead of me in the drizzle. Clouds had rolled in and a light rain was falling, just like the night of the murders years ago. The street was silent. Most of the neighbouring houses were dark. I parked a few doors down and walked under the orange glow of a streetlight to the front steps. Keller was already there waiting, hands in his coat pockets. He greeted me quietly, and we wasted no time. I unlocked the door, and we stepped into that time capsule of horror. The air inside was stale and cold. Our flashlight beams cut across draped furniture and dust-filled space. The dining room lay ahead, empty now, but I could almost see the faint outlines of where tragedy had struck. I checked my watch, 3 a.m. We moved slowly, our footsteps echoing. "This place gives me the creeps," Keller whispered. He was right behind me, shining his light over my shoulder. We entered the dining room. I walked to the spot where the table had once stood. The floorboards creaked familiarly beneath my feet. In the faint beam of my flashlight I could see small holes in the wood, the old drill marks where the table had been bolted down as evidence after the crime. Memories flooded back in a nauseating wave. My hand involuntarily went to my temple, which ached with an old phantom pain. Suddenly, a sound made us both freeze. It was a soft thump from somewhere upstairs. I turned to Keller. His eyes were wide. "Did you hear that?" he mouthed. I nodded. We both killed our flashlights, plunging the house into darkness except for the weak light filtering in from the street. For a moment, all was still. Then from above us we heard the slow, deliberate creak of a footstep on the floorboards upstairs. My blood ran cold. It sounded exactly like those recorded steps coming from the second floor. One after another, the creaks grew louder as whoever was upstairs moved toward the staircase landing. Keller's hand gripped my arm. In the darkness, I could just make out his face, tense and pale. The footsteps halted. The house fell silent again. I strained to listen, my heart hammering. Was the killer up there, watching us from the top of the stairs? In the faint glow from outside, I could see the bottom of the staircase, but the upstairs was pitch black. Without warning, a figure lunged out of the darkness at us from the base of the stairs. There was a blur of motion and a dazzling flash as Keller's dropped flashlight spun across the floor. I was slammed back against the wall, something cold and sharp pressed to my throat. Keller shouted, "Police, drop it!" his voice echoing in the empty house. He had his gun drawn, trained on the shadowy form that had pinned me. My eyes adjusted enough to make out a man in dark clothes and a ski mask. He had a long knife pressed to my neck. I could feel a warm trickle of blood where the blade nicked my skin. "Let him go!" Keller yelled. His gun was steady, but he didn't have a clean shot with me in the way. The masked figure tilted his head, knife still at my throat. When he spoke, his voice was low and distorted, like he was using something to conceal it. "Hello, detective," he hissed. I couldn't tell if he was addressing Keller or me. "Drop the knife now," Keller barked. I heard the strain in his voice. This was the moment every cop fears, when a hostage's life hangs in the balance. Time slowed to a crawl. Rainwater dripped through the leaky roof somewhere, a faint pat, pat on the floorboards. My mind sharpened. The masked man's jacket was soaked, rainwater dripping off, and his breathing was laboured. I realised with a start that his hand holding the knife was trembling. I mustered a hoarse whisper, barely daring to move my lips against the blade. Why now? Why after all this time? It slipped out without me fully intending, raw and desperate. The figure gave a low, mirthless laugh that warbled through the voice disguiser. "I've been waiting for you," he rasped. In a sudden, swift motion, I saw his free hand dip toward his pocket. Bang! A gunshot thundered in the tight space, lighting up the foyer for an instant. Keller had fired. The masked man jolted, a burst of dark blood staining his shoulder. He staggered back with a howl, wrenching the knife away from my throat. I stumbled forward, throat burning as Keller rushed in. In one fluid motion, Keller slammed the man to the floor and pinned him, knocking the knife from his grasp. The masked assailant writhed, but he was injured. Keller managed to wrench his arms behind his back and hold him down. I snatched up my flashlight with shaking hands and trained it on them. "Don't move," Keller shouted, pressing his knee into the man's back. With one hand, Keller held the man's arms, and with the other he ripped off the ski mask. A pale, rain-soaked face was revealed in my beam of light. A man, maybe in his mid-30s, with wet brown hair matted to his forehead. He gasped in pain, eyes screwed shut for a moment, then opened them and glared up at us. Those eyes, they were wild, desperate, and strangely familiar. My heart nearly stopped. Though hardened by age and fury, they reminded me of a face I'd seen long ago in a much happier time. Keller panted, keeping the man pinned. "Why did you do it? Are you the one who killed those families?" he demanded, voice edged with anger and something like betrayal. The man beneath him laughed, a broken, wheezing sound. "You have no idea," he muttered. I knelt down, shining the light directly on his face now. My hands were shaking badly. "Who are you?" I asked, but part of me already knew. My mind was scrambling, trying to reject the impossible recognition forming in it. He turned his head slightly toward me, lip curled in a sneer. His eyes locked onto mine with pure hatred. "You don't recognize me, Detective Halloran?" He spat out my name like poison. "I'm disappointed." A cold wave of shock rolled through me. "Michael. It's Michael, the missing boy, grown up and alive, and looking at me with murderous intent." I felt the room sway. "Michael," I breathed, hardly more than a whisper. The man's sneer widened into a bitter grin. "Took you long enough." Keller's grip faltered slightly. He looked from me to the man on the floor, confusion and dawning horror on his face. "Michael, as in the kid you never found," the man snarled. His voice dropped to a guttural whisper. "The kid you abandoned." His eyes were on me alone now. I opened my mouth to protest, but words failed. A decades-old guilt, sharp and corrosive, flared up inside me. We never stopped looking," I stammered. "Liar!" Michael suddenly bucked under Keller with terrifying strength. He threw his cuffed arms. Keller had managed to slap one cuff on during the struggle over Keller's head, looping the chain around Keller's neck before the young detective could react. In a flash, Keller was the one caught, the steel chain of the handcuffs pressing against his throat from behind as Michael pulled with manic strength. Keller gagged, eyes bulging. He still had one hand cuffed to Michael's wrist, but the chain was now a garrote around his neck. I lunged forward to intervene, but Michael twisted, dragging Keller between us as a shield. Keller was choking, clawing at the chain, his gun clattering to the floor. "Stop!" I cried out, my voice cracking. I had my revolver, but I couldn't get a clear shot without risking Keller. In a panic, I scooped up the fallen knife instead and pressed it to Michael's throat from behind. "Let him go, Michael, or I swear I'll—" "Or you'll what?" he hissed, even as a thin line of blood appeared under my blade. "Go ahead, do it. Maybe you're finally ready to finish it." Keller made a strangled noise, laughed, his face turning red. I eased the knife's pressure just a hair, terrified that Michael might actually force me to cut him and end this in blood. "Michael, please," I pleaded, voice shaking. "It doesn't have to be like this." He snarled, the sound feral and anguished. You left me with him, and now you're going to pay." He pulled the chain tighter. Keller's eyes rolled, panic flaring in them. I was losing him. Michael was too far gone in rage and pain. Desperately, I tried a different tack. "Michael, I know what he did to you," I said hurriedly. "I know you're hurting. You know nothing," he screamed. The house seemed to shudder with the force of his rage. "You have no idea what I went through, what I became because of you." Keller's lips were turning blue. I had seconds at best. My mind raced, and then a realization hit me like a thunderbolt. In all the years that Ghost had haunted me, she'd only ever whispered my name. But what if I summoned the only name that might reach what was left of that terrified boy inside the monster? "Michael," I said softly, "your mother, she never stopped loving you." His movements faltered. I felt his muscles tense differently, confusion cutting through his fury. "What? Your mother," I repeated, seizing on his hesitation. "I saw her, Michael. I've seen her spirit. She's been here waiting, trying to protect you." Tears were blurring my eyes. "She knows what happened. She doesn't blame you. She loves you." "Shut up," he snarled, but the chain loosened a fraction. Keller coughed, sucking in a ragged breath. "You were just a child," I pressed on gently. "It was not your fault. It was the man who took you. He's to blame. Not you. Not your family." Michael's breath hitched. In the dim light, I saw something shatter in his expression. The knife in my hand trembled against his throat, but I held it steady enough. She's been waiting for me?" he whispered, voice suddenly small, frightened. "Yes," I answered, a sob catching in my throat. "She's here now, Michael." And then, as if on cue, a soft glow blossomed in the darkness of the foyer. She appeared. Just a few feet away, the pale woman in the soaked nightgown stood, her form shimmering faintly. Water pooled around her bare feet, but her eyes were no longer the grotesque, sewn-open horror from the crime scene. They were gentle and sorrowful. She looked exactly as she did in my dreams, a grieving mother suspended between life and death. Michael saw her. I felt him see her, because his entire body went slack with shock. The makeshift garrote fell from Keller's neck as Michael's hands dropped. "Mom," he choked out, his voice breaking. Keller scrambled away, gasping and bewildered, but I barely noticed. My gaze was locked on the ghostly figure now kneeling beside Michael. She reached out and stroked his sweat-drenched hair, and Michael leaned into the touch with a wail so raw it made my heart lurch. "I'm sorry? I'm so sorry," he sobbed, collapsing to his knees, though his wrists were still half-cuffed together. I lowered the knife, my own eyes overflowing. The ghostly mother wrapped her arms around her grown son. To me, the embrace looked like a soft halo of light enfolding him. Michael sobbed into empty air, or into her shoulder, if one could see it that way. "It's okay," I heard myself whisper. I didn't know if I was speaking to Michael or the spirit or both. "You're not alone anymore." Behind the mother and son, two more faint shapes took form, a man placing a gentle hand on the woman's shoulder, and a little girl peeking out shyly from behind her skirts. The rest of Michael's family, together in death, watching over the one they left behind. I was openly crying now. The sight was both heartbreaking and beautiful. Keller, still on the floor coughing, looked up and froze as he saw what I saw. His expression was one of pure astonishment and fear, but the ghosts paid him no mind. Michael lifted his head from his mother's embrace. He looked at the hazy faces of his father and sibling, then back at her. I miss you," he whispered brokenly. Her hand caressed his cheek. Though her voice made no sound, I felt the words in the air. "We never left you." Michael closed his eyes, tears streaming. The mother leaned forward and pressed a tender kiss to his forehead. A sense of profound peace fell over the foyer like a blanket. I held my breath as the ghostly woman gazed at her son one last time with a loving smile. Then slowly, she and the two figures behind her began to fade, the light dissipating into the shadows. "Mom, please don't go," Michael whimpered, reaching out. But they were gone. The faint light snuffed out, leaving only darkness, and an echo of love so palpable I could feel it. Michael remained on his knees, trembling. I gently set the knife aside and approached him cautiously, kneeling down. Keller retrieved the handcuff key from his belt with shaky hands and moved in to secure Michael properly, but I held up a hand to stop him. Instead, I reached out and very slowly unclasped the half-fastened cuff on Michael's wrist myself. He didn't resist or react. He just knelt there, head bowed. The three of us stayed like that in silence for a long moment, Michael kneeling free, sobbing softly, Keller and I watching in stunned quiet. In the distance, I could hear the wail of sirens. Backup was coming, likely alerted by the gunshot or Keller's earlier radio call. "Frank?" Keller eventually managed, his voice hoarse and shaky. "What? Who?" I put a hand on his shoulder. "Later," I murmured. There was too much to explain, and yet no explanation would ever suffice for what we witnessed. Michael finally looked up at me. He seemed so different now, not the enraged killer who had nearly ended us, but a lost, broken man. She forgave me," he whispered, eyes red and wide with childlike relief and sorrow. I nodded, tears still slipping down my face. "Yes, and so do I, Michael." At that, he collapsed forward into my arms, and I held him tightly, like I would have held that terrified 10-year-old boy if I'd found him back then. He cried into my shoulder, decades of pain pouring out in shuddering waves. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry," he kept repeating. "It's all right," I soothed, my own voice trembling. "It's over now. It's over." My gaze drifted to where the apparition had been, and I swear I felt a gentle breeze pass by, almost warm against the cold rain seeping in, a final benediction. By the time uniformed officers burst through the door, guns drawn and flashlights slicing the dark, the confrontation was done. They found me cradling a wounded, weeping Michael on the dusty floor, with Detective Keller sitting nearby, pale and dazed, the two of us flanking the man who had been our tormentor and was now our charge. In the days that followed, the full story emerged in agonizing detail. Michael had been abducted by the original killer, a disturbed man who became a twisted father figure and captor to him for years. Eventually, Michael escaped, but not unscathed. He had lived under aliases, even managed to become a police officer under the name Ryan Keller, his middle name and a random last name he chose. The darkness inflicted on him festered until he recreated the gruesome scene from 1999, desperately trying to both avenge and relive his trauma, torn between identities. The kidnapped Patel boy, young Raj, was found alive, tied up in a motel but unharmed. Michael had not been able to bring himself to kill the child, perhaps a sign that he was fighting the very darkness that consumed him. When I visited Michael in custody, he broke down in tears again. Without the rage, he was just a deeply scarred man who never truly left that night in 1999. I tried to be normal, he confessed softly through the bars of his cell. I thought if I became a cop, I could stop people like him, but then I got pulled back to that house. It wouldn't let go. He looked up at me, eyes pleading. I wasn't in control. It was like he was still inside my head. I told him the only truth I knew, that his family loved him, and that what happened was not his fault. He nodded, saying, "When I saw them, I felt free." He managed a sad, hopeful smile. "For the first time since I was a kid, I'm not afraid." I squeezed his shoulder through the bars. Neither am I. He understood what I meant. The footsteps, the whispers, our mutual hauntings, were gone, as if the ghosts themselves had been set free once justice, or perhaps simply truth, was finally achieved. Michael helped identify his abductor from old photos. The man had been a transient who died years ago, a monster who never faced earthly justice. But perhaps somewhere he was facing a higher kind now. As for me, I left the precinct that final day with a strange lightness in my chest. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of gold and purple. I realized I felt at peace. That night, I slept in my own bed without fear. And at 3:17 a.m., I opened my eyes in the gentle darkness, awakened not by phantom footsteps but by a sense of presence. Standing in the doorway of my bedroom, just for an instant, I saw the silhouette of a woman. Her form was faint, outlined in silver moonlight. I could just make out a damp nightgown hanging from her frame. But I felt no dread. On the contrary, a calm reassurance washed over me. "Thank you," I whispered into the still air, not sure if she could hear. The silhouette lingered a moment longer. Though I couldn't see her face, I felt the soft warmth of a smile. Then she was gone, and for the first time in over 2 decades, I truly was not alone in the dark. I closed my eyes and slept deeply, the silence absolute and healing. The next morning, I visited the brownstone one last time. The early sun filtered through the broken boards of the windows. In the quiet dining room, I placed a single white lily on the dusty floor where that family had once sat. It was for them, and it was for Michael too, a symbol of innocence lost and perhaps regained. As I turned to leave, I imagined I heard a soft giggle of a child and a woman's gentle hush, as if urging me onward. I smiled to myself and stepped out into the light. After all these years, the cold case of 1999 was finally closed. But the story, my story, will never leave me. It lives in the creak of an old floorboard, in the hush of a silent house, in the distant echo of footsteps at 3:17 a.m. Yet I'm not afraid of those echoes anymore. They serve as a reminder that even in the darkest of times, love and truth can persevere. And sometimes, just sometimes, the ghosts that haunt us most fiercely are the ones that lead us back to the light. And that is the darkest, most important story I ever lived to tell. Some cases don't just stay with you, they live inside you, whispering in the dark. And when the past knocks, it doesn't ask permission, it kicks the door down. Because the real horror isn't what you saw back then, it's what you brought home with you. The only thing more terrifying than the killer you couldn't catch is becoming him.
Every story has an end, but here, the mysteries never stop. Thank you for watching and being a part of this journey into the unknown. Your support keeps these stories alive, and there's plenty more waiting for you. We drop 3 new stories every week, so if you crave suspense, the unexplained and the downright chilling, make sure you're subscribed and ready for what's next. Until then, keep your lights on, your doors locked, and remember, some stories stay with you long after they're told.